So I want to start our talk today by looking at the issue of entrepreneurship and sustainable development, or more broadly, the link between entrepreneurial activity and things like global warming. So how can entrepreneurship either help with the process of dealing with global warming and some of the climate change issues we face, and some of the other environmental issues that we face today in the world? Or how can entrepreneurship also hinder some of those processes? Is entrepreneurship a good or a bad thing when it comes to environmental sustainability? Now, the concept of environmental sustainability and sustainable development has been around since the late 1960s or early 1970s. As I said in my introduction, there was some very important books that came out at this time, such as Rachel Carson's book called Silent Spring, which really led people to question the impacts that business and consumer behaviour had on the natural environment. And because of this, all area of business, including entrepreneurship, has been now asked or questioned in terms of their environmental sustainability. So how positive are their impacts upon the natural world? And so what we want to do is talk about this issue of entrepreneurship and what role it might play in a sustainable environmental development. So one of the questions that you often get asked is, what on earth does climate change possibly have to do with entrepreneurship? Why would we be interested as entrepreneurs, as people who are starting new business ventures, be really interested in this sort of scientific thing called sustainability and climate change and environmental degradation? Well, I think the reason that we're interested is that many of the impacts that we see on the physical world today have been caused by the industrialisation of society and the massive resource uses that we have in our everyday life. And so as a result, we really do have an important role to play as entrepreneurs in solving some of these issues linked to climate change and the environmental crisis. And I think Einstein really summed it up best when he said, we can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking that we use to create them. So instead, what we need to do is shift our thinking to think differently, to come up with different ideas about how we might change the future for the natural environment to solve the problem. Now again, we know that entrepreneurship is all about doing things differently. It's about change and it's about differences in behaviour. And so entrepreneurship really does have an important role to play in changing the impact that we have on the physical world. And the book talks a lot about this idea that we need to engage in entrepreneurship as if the planet actually mattered. And look, it really does matter. The planet is what supports us. It gives us food, it gives us water, generates fresh air. And if we don't take care of the planet, then who's going to take care of us? And so it's a very important part of entrepreneurial activity to understand the impacts that business might have on the physical world. And look, you're probably all well aware of these sorts of impacts, and this slide really just summarises for you some of those things. Business is seen to increase climate change through the burning of fossil fuels, the production of waste, and as a result, this tends to lead to great environmental damage. We have acid rain and polluted rivers that come from chemicals released from production facilities. There's competition for fresh water and physical land driven by the industrialisation of much of farming and crop production today. We're seeing big pressures created by population growth. And so all of these challenges, all of these factors that entrepreneurship is driving, that business is driving, need to also be solved with entrepreneurial solutions. So there's an opportunity here for us as entrepreneurs to come in and find different ways of utilising the natural capital of the planet and trying to achieve business outcomes while at the same time trying to achieve sustainable outcomes for the environment. And look, I think people would agree that in some ways, entrepreneurship does actually contribute to the planetary crisis. Entrepreneurship is all about growing and developing new businesses, about taking advantage of opportunities that are presented to us. And certainly in the early days of the Industrial Revolution, there wasn't a lot of thought given to the impacts that business activities might have on the natural world. And so, people would say that entrepreneurs like Henry Ford, by popularising the car and making the car available to as many people as we possibly could, actually contributed to the growing impact of CO2 in the natural environment. Cars are a major generator of carbon dioxide. They pollute the environment. They use resources in terms of the steel that goes into their infrastructure, the rubber that goes in their tyres. And so if Henry Ford hadn't made that product affordable for people, then maybe we wouldn't have those impacts. Similarly, Thomas Edison was a leader in the use of electricity and introducing electric lighting into people's houses. And so the actions of people like Edison made that product attractive to consumers, and that greatly increased our demand for power and electricity. Again, something that contributes quite significantly to the impacts on the natural world. So entrepreneurs do tend to be blamed quite often for the impacts that we see in terms of business on the environment. Now, look, I tend to think that's a little bit unfair. I think that business people, like many of us, are concerned about the planetary impacts that their actions might have. But we do need to be mindful that these actions have to be managed and that we need to do them in a sustainable way. And we need to find a way now to live within the boundaries that are possible within the physical world. And what we see is at the moment we're living in a time of environmental crisis. And we tend to see that innovation does emerge during these times of crisis. If you look at when a lot of the large businesses have emerged, they've often emerged at times when things like the global financial crisis have occurred or the Great Depression. So crises can be actually a great stimulus or catalyst for change in business practice and can lead to new business ventures being developed. It's interesting, if you look at the traditional Chinese word for crisis, it has two characters, and those characters, one represents danger, and there's a lot of danger associated with bad, negative environmental crisis situations, but also opportunity. And our job as entrepreneurs is to take problems or challenges that we see like this and to turn them into opportunities, to turn them into new business ventures that we might be able to pursue. And so while there's no doubt that the environmental crisis is something that is of concern to people, there is actually a lot of opportunity for us to develop new businesses at this time that help to solve some of these problems, that help to solve some of these crises. And in fact, entrepreneurship might help to shake things up a bit. It might create new ways of doing business that are less damaging to the natural environment. And really what we see here is that all of these environmental problems, all these environmental issues, which we're going to talk about a little bit in more detail just shortly, opens up what we call the opportunity space. That because we've got these problems and because we have to deal with all of these things in a meaningful way, we are able to put on the table lots of different and innovative solutions to the problem. And so again, entrepreneurs can come into this space and help to solve some of the impacts that we have on the natural world.